At long last, the Danielle Hunter situation is resolved. Kind of. At least he's got a contract for this year, though. We'll explain everything on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I am your host, Luke Braun. Let's find some joy today, and that will not be too hard to do because the Vikings have finally worked out a deal with Danielle Hunter. You can find this show anywhere you find your favorite podcasts, whether it is an audio listening platform like SiriusXM, which we are now partnered with, or YouTube or Amazon Fire and Roku, where you can see that I'm not at my usual setup. I'm actually on the road right now. The Vikings have a great habit of announcing huge news while I'm somewhere else. But I'm excited to talk to you guys. Thank you so much for to all of my hashtag everydayers, people who listen to this show every single day. I appreciate you all so much. So today we have to talk about Danielle Hunter signing. I'll give you everything you need to know about the contract and talk a little bit about how we got here and where we go from here, why we're in this situation, why this is so weird. But also, it's been a couple of days of camp since we last talked, and there's some stuff that I want to ask you, or I want to talk to you about as well, like winners and losers and all that stuff. So we'll get into all of that. But first things first, Danielle Hunter signs a 1-year contract. He'll remain a Viking, no trades, none of that stuff. It will be a $17 million deal. All of that is guaranteed. Whether that is signing bonus or salary will impact the cap hit greatly. So we don't actually know what Danielle Hunter's cap hit is for 2023, and then how much of it is dead cap for future years. But there is, whatever it is, he'll make $17 million divided up however the Vikings want it to be divided up. Which form the money takes actually doesn't make a huge difference to Danielle Hunter at all, or ever to a player. He also has $3 million in incentives. So it's an up to $20 million deal. Those incentives are SAC incentives. Here's what I don't know at the time of recording. You might know this by the time you listen to it, but I don't know the contract structure in terms of, did they add more void years? How much is bonus? How much is salary? But a way to think about it is whatever his cap hit is this year, the rest of it will be dead cap next year. That's going to be the way, because of the way void years work. They'll extend out the cap hit all the way into the future, but then when the contract actually voids, which is an automatic cut, that is a clause in the contract that just automatically deletes the contract, all of that spread out money will accelerate into the same year. So essentially, the Vikings can use that mechanism to make the decision, how much do we want to pay this year and how much do we want to pay next year? They could pay it all this year if they want to. They could pay almost all of it next year, aside from certain minimums that the CBA requires of you. Which is like $1 million and change. So they could go anywhere between those, right? And then it's just a matter of doing the multiplication math right to make it like work out that way. So my guess is that they will be, if you're wondering, well, how much cap space will they have? That'll be a question that a lot of people have. My guess is they have about a Jefferson and a TJ Hawkinson's worth of cap space left. And then I think that will be the end of their cap maneuvering stuff. They'll probably have $1 to $2 million somewhere in there of contingency money going into the season for, hey, we lost 4 cornerbacks, we got to sign someone off the street, that kind of thing. You usually want a little bit of extra cash left over. So I would say they'll be at about that once they're done with whatever they're going to do with Jefferson and Hawkinson, assuming those extensions get done as we expect them to. And right now they are expected to get done based on everything we've heard from beat reporters and actual quotes about this. So that's where I think we're at cap wise. I also don't know what the incentives are for Danielle Hunter. So that $3 million in incentives, depending on how many sacks it is, if it's okay, get 15 sacks, you get $3 million. It's probably something scaling, but let's keep it simple. 15 sacks, you get your $3 million. Okay. Well, he got 10.5 last year, so he didn't accomplish that. That would mean the cap sees it as an unlikely and not likely to be earned incentive, and it won't count against 2023's cap. But if he gets 15 sacks, they'll have to pay a $3 million cap charge next year, whether Danielle Hunter's on the team or not. They just have to kind of catch up and say, okay, Danielle Hunter got his $3 million. Now it has to count against your cap, but it'll count against the 2024 cap. If it's a likely to be, let's say it's 5 sacks and you get your $3 million. Well, he did accomplish that last year. So if he can do it again, he'll get his money, right? So because the cap sees that as a likely to be earned incentive, the Vikings do have to have basically $3 million in space ready to go to pay Danielle Hunter. And if they don't, if he doesn't get, let's say he gets hurt or he just doesn't get that many sacks, whatever, let's say he doesn't get his 5 sacks, then they get it back in 2024 as a cap credit. And essentially their salary cap number will just go up by $3 million. That's the way that system works. So look at when you find out how many sacks it takes for Danielle Hunter to get his $3 million. And again, my guess is usually it's something like you get $1 million at 5, $1 million at 10, $1 million at 15 or something like that. 4, 8, 12, whatever. Whatever that structure divides up as will also divide up what year that 3 million will count against the cap. So you can kind of do your own calculations that way. But I think from a broader scale, we have to think about where this leaves the Vikings. So I was very worried about what the Vikings edge room would look like without Danielle Hunter. I mean, you've got like DJ Wanham starting, you got Patrick Jones competing for a spot, you got Marcus Davenport far and away your best guy, and the Saints didn't even want him. I mean, that is a bleak room. We probably would have been going, okay, I guess we'll bring in Yannick Ngakoue and like trying to come to terms with that. Like that would have been very, very dark. And we might be in a similar spot next year. So basically where we go from here is Danielle Hunter will do the joint practices, which is, I think, was very important. I think that was the true deadline to get this done, because the joint practices with the Cardinals and Titans are what Kevin O'Connell uses as his preseason for the starters. The starters won't play in the televised preseason games against the Seahawks and Cardinals and Titans, probably, if they're going to do it the way they did last year. They just will not. No Kirk, no Justin Jefferson. You're not going to see those guys on TV, so don't get your hopes up. Instead, they're going to be in the joint practices where they can get more reps than they would get in a preseason game. They're a little bit safer than they would be in a full speed preseason game in a practice situation. They'll be full speed reps, but a little bit less so than like, here we are, we're in the stadium, we're doing the whole thing. Like you can sort of, the practice field, I think, is going to be a bit of a safer environment, or at least that's the theory. And you can just get a little bit more work in with a little bit less fatigue than in an actual preseason game. And then the televised preseason games are for figuring out who makes the team, figuring out starting jobs. And, if you're in a competition for your job, you're playing in the preseason. It's an evaluative time. So the preseason is a proving ground, where the joint practices is for getting Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson ready for the season. So it was important to get that done for the joint practices, and they did. He won't even miss a padded practice. His first practice will be Monday, July 31st, when you're listening to when this episode releases. So today, I guess, is what I should say. And that will be the first padded practice anyway. So he didn't even miss a padded practice. So this whole hold-in situation ultimately shouldn't have an outsized impact on the season. And then we get to whatever happens this season, however well Danielle Hunter does. Now they'll have from kind of the end of the season to the void date, which will be similar to Kirk Cousins's. So we'll have this moment for like 6-ish weeks or less if they make the playoffs, where we'll be talking about what do we do with Kirk and Hunter. And there's this like deadline looming about Kirk Cousins and Danielle Hunter and their contracts voiding out. Do they extend them? Do they let them walk? What do we do? But the nice thing is Danielle Hunter will count as a compensatory free agent. So if you're worried about comp picks, he will count as a compensatory free agent because the Vikings signed him to a contract that signed him through 2023. Now they've restructured, they've messed with the money, they've messed with all of that stuff. All of that doesn't matter. The compensatory formula cares that if you say you're our guy through 2023, it cares that you are actually the guy through 2023. If he had been released or if he had been, had his contract turned into void years, like with Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen signed a deal that I think had him signed through 2024, but he had his contract reworked into void years, or no, he was just straight up released. Somebody like, I'm trying to think of like who did void years, but my brain isn't producing it, but you understand what I mean. Because the contract for Danielle Hunter that he signed in 2018 had him signed through 2022, I think, and then he actually added a year. It sees him as a compensatory free agent. So if he goes over to the Bengals and signs a mega deal with them, we get a 3rd round pick or whatever. That doesn't do a lot for me, and ultimately, I'm a little disappointed in this outcome. I wish Danielle Hunter were a long-term Viking. I wanted him to retire a Viking. I think he's got plenty in the tank. I think the allegations of his demise are very, very, very untrue. You can look at the metrics for that, where he got 10.5 sacks. He was top 10 in the league in pressures. You can look at the tape for that, where it is apparently obvious. And I think the only argument you can make against Danielle Hunter is I didn't see his pressures on TV, which is more of a you problem. So I think that he should get a huge payday, but I also understand, look, you're an edge rusher, you're over 30, suddenly you become this weird, only ever sign contracts in May, like Jadeveon Clowney commodity, and maybe you're not going to get that big of a deal. So also, if he does sign and get a comp pick, that's a 2025 comp pick. So like a 5th rounder in 2025 is not going to be something that I feel is great compensation. But the compensation is you get an extra year of Danielle Hunter. That's the reward here, is Danielle Hunter plays for the Vikings, which is a very good thing that they need very bad. But I don't want to spend the whole show on Danielle Hunter. So let's talk a little bit about what else happened in training camp and who's rising, who's falling. It's getting really, really interesting out there. But before I do that, let me talk to you about a good old Gramble. It's FanDuel Sportsbook. And as we are getting to the actual regular season, it's a great time to start getting your futures bets in there. Vikings over under 8.5 wins, for example. Justin Jefferson over under 1,400 yards, which is what he got his rookie year, and he's beat that every year. So if you want to bet that over, you can find that at FanDuel.com. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook, and it's America's #1 sportsbook for a very good reason. That reason is it is safe, secure, super easy to use, and they pay you out instantly when you win. Also, if you bet on FanDuel, you can get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. So that means, let's say you put in $20, make a $20 bet on the Vikings winning over 8.5 games, for example, or maybe on an MLB thing, right? You can go take an MLB bet. You get $200 back in bonus bets, no matter if that bet wins or loses. You just get $200 back just for going to FanDuel.com/lockedon and signing up through that link. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon to claim up to $200 in bonus bets, depending on what your first bet is. Once again, that is FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, make every moment more. And once again, thank you so much to my #everydayers, those of you who listen to this show every single day. Sound off in the comments on YouTube or whatever if you can. Let's just kind of go over the rest of camp. There are some very interesting things going on. For one, Brian O'Neill still on the practice field doing rehab. He is still on, or Kevin O'Connell speculates, ahead of a predetermined plan they had for him that had him getting ready for week 1. So they still are optimistic that he will be ready for week 1. Obviously, setbacks can happen. Lots can change between now and then. They could have just been lying. So grain of salt with all that. But Kevin O'Connell has told us, hey, look, Brian O'Neill's doing great. As good a news as you can hope for this during this sort of partially torn Achilles recovery process. That's all great. In terms of depth chart news, I guess there's nothing particularly that we didn't already know. Joejuan Williams is getting a lot of run with the ones, and it seems like he actually is the #1 corner next to, or the number 3 corner, I guess I should say, because it's Byron Murphy or Caleb Evans, and then those are the 2 outside corners. And then when it's nickel, Byron Murphy plays inside, and he'll move into the slot, and then Joejuan Williams comes in. So you could call Joejuan Williams the nickel package corner, but he's not playing slot. He's playing to the outside. It's just that they're having Byron Murphy move. He can play both inside and outside. So not Andrew Booth, not Mekhi Blackman, which is interesting because Mekhi Blackman was playing a lot of nickel in the slot during OTAs, but it doesn't seem like they've done that a lot. I'm going to be curious to actually watch it for myself and see just what the rotation is, because, people who've been there every day might not say, oh, and by the way, Mekhi Blackman played in the slot again, because they said that 5 days ago, so I want to see if that's still happening. And I'll bring that to you. But Lewis Seen is also firmly with the 2s, although he did have a great highlight on Saturday. It was a 2 invert play. So you had Andrew Booth was the corner over there, and he backed off into a high safety position, like a half safety. And then Lewis Seen basically screamed across the field. Very athletic play. When you're an invert, it's not a particularly that's just one where you just got to take it and run, and the ball goes to where you were already running. So it's mostly just a matter of athleticism, which he passed the test with flying colors, got a really sick interception. So that's awesome. On the defensive line, you've got a little bit more run for Jaquelin Roy with the 2s, but it's really Dean Lowry, Kyrie's Tonga, and Harrison Phillips. There's your your defensive line guys. And then you've had DJ Wanham and Patrick Jones all kind of rotating around, with Marcus Davenport going in and out and sort of playing a lot with the defense. I mean, I haven't really talked about it because it's sort of one of those camp things you always hear, but the offense has raved about just how much harder Brian Flores' defense has made things compared to last year. They've all said, man, it's really intense and there's all kinds of different looks and it's a lot harder to do everything against them. Which you can take as much encouragement from that as you want. I'm not your dad, but that is the kind of thing that you sort of hear every camp. So I'll believe it when I see it. Which, hey, I soon will see it. So I'll give you a better take on that then. On the offensive side of the ball, it's all been fairly chalk. Justin Jefferson is blowing your eyes out with some insane highlight every single day. KJ Osborne and Jordan Addison are all getting there. I would say the biggest winner of camp is Jalen Naylor, who has gotten all kinds of interesting stuff. He's actually worked in with the ones a lot. There have been 11 personnel moments where Jordan Addison has not been on the field and Jalen Naylor has. So that's a cool opportunity for him. Addison is getting still plenty of run with the ones and all that, so don't freak out. And he's made his fair share of plays as well. So has KJ Osborne. The wide receivers have looked great. Cousins himself has looked awesome. Everybody says he looks really sharp. There's all kinds of highlights coming out from him. There was one interception that was actually an Andrew Booth interception as the twos were going against the ones that looked like it was a miscommunication, not just bad quarterback being bad, which is miscommunication in camp. You kind of expect that, right? You're installing new things, you're trying new stuff out. Of course, things get a little, wires get a little crossed during camp. I'm trying to think of other injury news. Vidarian Lowe did leave the practice, so we'll see what happens with him. Bobby Evans, of all people, stepped in to be the second team tackle. Right now, Oli Udoh is playing second team right tackle, and they're cross training Blake Brandel at guard. I don't know if in the actual event of a game they would do it that way. They would, because they had Blake Brandel do that last year when Brian O'Neill or when Darisaw was out. They had Blake Brandel do it, and then Brandel blew out his whole leg really bad. So that ended his season, and then it became Udoh for the playoff game. But Udoh right now has been taking all the first team reps. So I would be curious to see if Brian O'Neill does end up missing any time this year. I will be very, very curious to see who gets that job. I think it's a more open competition than some other competitions on the roster, but that's an interesting one. Vidarian Lowe also was rotating in for those reps, but then he went off the field. So that kind of is a bummer. And he was taking the second team reps as well. Now that's Bobby Evans, who just joined the team. We'll see what happens too when Danielle Hunter comes in and when the pads actually come on. The thing about evaluating guys right now, without the pads on, it really, really disadvantages the corners, and it really, really makes anything you see on offense and defensive line completely useless. There is no evaluation you can do without pads on, and the team knows that. So Kevin O'Connell's still calling this an evaluative period, especially on O-line and D-line, where it's just without the pads, you're just not really gonna see. That is such a physical position that requires down-to-down physicality. And when you're not allowed to have that because you don't have pads and helmets, you just have those shells on, you're just not going to see anything. So I would say anything you've seen about, this defensive lineman or this offensive lineman looks good or looks bad or whatever, anywhere around the league, if that camp doesn't have any pads on, I would say throw it in the trash. And if they're really that good, they'll continue to be good in pads, and we can see it then. Ivan Pace and Troy Dye with the twos. That's very interesting. That's been the depth chart. You've got Asma and Jordan Hicks with the ones, but then it's Troy Dye and Ivan Pace with the twos. And Ivan Pace has turned some heads. People have been whoa, he's actually kind of flying around. He looks really fast. He's made a couple plays. But that leaves Troy Reeder as the odd man out and playing with the threes, which I actually had in my 53-man roster prediction, which you can find on my Patreon page, patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. I actually had that thinking, this kind of comes down to special teams, and Troy Dye seems to always make the team there. He's actually kind of a core member of every special teams unit, and I probably shouldn't overlook that. But I also think Ivan Pace just is the third best linebacker in the room. I think he might just be one of the better players from scrimmage, even though he's an undrafted guy, and even though he's too small and he's got all these problems. That says more about my opinion of the room than it says about my opinion of Ivan Pace. But either way, I mean, he'll take it, right? So that's an interesting thing to watch if Ivan Pace continues to get those second team reps. If he stays with the second team all preseason, I would say, yeah, that's kind of a signal that they intend to roster him. And with Dye, it's a little less important how he does from scrimmage because of what he does on special teams. But that's another thing that I'm really excited to look at is the kickoff units and the punt units. Who's on them? Who's doing things on them? And I know they wear those little like penny jerseys. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to tell because the numbers don't ever match. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to tell who's who under the helmets, but either way, there's something to try to keep an eye out. I guess that kind of goes over some guys, but I do want to just kind of say, okay, who is rising and who is falling? Who's having a good day? Who's having a bad day? I might get a little bit redundant there, but the winners and losers thing, that's going to be what's up next on the Locked On Vikings podcast. Keeping it going with the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of that Locked On Podcast Network. You can find all kinds of great stuff on the Locked On Podcast Network, including Locked On NFL, which I am on. I'm a part of on Tuesdays. Usually I'll be flying when we usually record it. So I won't be there this week, but for the rest of the season and beyond. So go check that out. Also, again, check out patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. So also I'll have camp recaps. I'll be live on YouTube on Locked On Vikings YouTube from the parking lot of camp every day that I'm there. I'll be there for 5 days over the course of the week. I think the last one is Monday the 8th. So I'll be there for most of those practices and I will do stuff from the car, do a quick 20-minute live Q&A. Also get your questions in for Twitter Tuesday, which will be tomorrow's episode. I'll tell you at the end of the show where to get them if you don't already know, or where to send them if you don't already know. Anyways, winners and losers. I would say winners of camp. I'm going to say a winner of camp. I know this sounds weird, because like where else, how much further up does he have to go? But Justin Jefferson, it just feels like he's showed up and dominated every single day. It's just like he's just there to hype up the crowd and have fun. And the game seems like that easy to him, if that makes sense. I don't know if you can be more hyped possibly about Justin Jefferson, but if there is room, go for it. And I think the wide receivers in general have had a really good camp. It just seems like there's a lot of KJ Osborne and Addison and Naylor beating up on all these corners, which kind of means that the losers think of a guy like Andrew Booth. There's a rep of Justin Jefferson cooking Andrew Booth. Again, I think it was the same period of the ones versus the twos for a big like 55-yard score on a big go route on I think it was like a go and an over underneath. I forget the name for that concept. I know there is one. Anyways, but it was Justin Jefferson one-on-one against Andrew Booth. Andrew Booth tries to play catch technique, which is where you'll be flat-footed and you're supposed to sort of like hold your ground basically and hit it, put a hit into the wide receiver. You can do that if you're holding your ground. It won't be illegal contact because you have a right to hold your ground basically. So you can do that. That's legal and it's called catch technique and it's something corners do all the time. And he does that, but JJ survives that contact and he doesn't get slowed down. And now he's just got separation because you were flat footed. You were not backpedaling. You had no backwards momentum. You got to turn and run. He's gone. That kind of play is the sort of risky way that Booth always loves to play. And he's just like, you're not going to do that against Justin Jefferson. What I wanted to see from him after watching what he did against, say, Dallas and the Bills in preseason was to see him have that more conservative pitch, have that club in his bag. I wanted to see him be able to, hey, look, man, you got to go one-on-one against AJ Brown. It's the Philly game and you're up, you got to be one-on-one against this like superstar. Good luck. And have him be able to have that, hey, maybe he'll get his 7 catches, but they'll only be for 60 yards kind of play. And if he doesn't have that, then you can't really trust putting him in over somebody like a Caleb Evans, big winner of camp, who has been firmly with the ones. He's just a starting corner. Congratulations, Caleb Evans. Feels like that competition's already over. You just won. A lot of camp left. Caleb Evans could just start sucking. Andrew Booth could start going crazy. Like it ain't over till the fat lady sings or whatever. But Caleb Evans seems to be miles ahead on that. And Joanne Williams seems to be the guy getting the reps otherwise, while Mekhi Blackman continues to figure it out on the twos. I already kind of mentioned Ivan Pace, big winner, Troy Reeder, big loser. Especially if this means Troy Reeder is off the team. But hey, Reeder could go play special teams, and that is not something that he's opposed to doing. That's not something he's unfamiliar with doing. You can have a fifth linebacker. I know like 4 linebackers has kind of been the thing when you have the front constructed the way that both Donatel and Flores sort of have the same personnel needs along the front. They, of course, approach things way differently, but 3 big interior guys, 2 edges that you call maybe outside linebackers or whatever, and then 2 inside linebackers, Asamoah and Hicks. You're not going to really have your 4-3 third guy, so you don't need, like with the Zimmer defenses, they would regularly keep 6 or 7 linebackers. You don't really need to do that, but you can keep. I don't care what 2 letters are next to your name. If you're good at special teams, you get to be on the team. Congratulations. So it's not over by any means for Troy Reeder, but if he doesn't start getting reps with the 2s, it means it's going to have to be special teams, and that's just a much harder way to make the team. A low-key winner might be Jack Podlesny, who is Matt Daniels did say, as much as you want to believe him, and I don't know if I do, hey, no, that's a real kicking competition. Really, no, it's actually a kicking competition, and we're doing it. He's made all his kicks so far and all that. But even if it isn't, even if I am right, and I think that Greg Joseph has too much guaranteed money in his contract for me not to think that the Vikings just are going to go with Greg Joseph, and that Podlesny is really more so here to be a guy on speed dial, perhaps on the practice squad even, that if Joseph goes down or if he just falls apart and you need to cut him, Podlesny can be the guy who say, hey, you were in camp with us, you prepared with us and everything, and we can now have a kicker that actually worked with our long snapper and our punter a lot, instead of bringing somebody off the street that's meeting these guys for the first time and then asking him to kick 4 days later. So that's, I think, more the point of bringing in like a random competition, and I basically am always in favor of doing that. I think if you, like with all the specialists too, but I think kicker in particular, if you bring a kicker into camp, or if you give a kicker, just anoint him the job in camp and he doesn't do anything else, and he doesn't have any competition, I think it's a wasted opportunity, I guess. You might as well get a guy used to being with your long snapper and your holder, and have that, on speed dial just in case. Thinking about other winners and losers, I have not heard much about any of the tight ends really of substance, so I can't really tell you much about what's going on there. I guess I should talk a little bit about the safeties. Cam Bynum still with the 1. Josh Metellus still kind of rotating in as that fifth DB sometimes. There's a lot of big nickel packages that have Metellus, and then sometimes the third guy is Joanne Williams. So I would guess, like, if they had to play a game tomorrow and that was the depth chart, you would have a Caleb Evans, Byron Murphy, Cam Bynum, Harrison Smith on for 100% of snaps. And then that fifth guy would rotate around. Sometimes it would be Metellus. Sometimes it would be Joanne Williams. Sometimes it would be Lewis Seen. And it depends on the coverage call you're in and the personnel that you're going up against, game plan, all of that stuff. So that's where I think the roster is at right now with the secondary. It was really great to see Lewis Seen make an actual play. I mean, look, he still kind of got that I'm coming back from injury thing to him. And I mean, he's been full go. He's not limited or anything like that. But there is still that, man, he's really like kind of redoing his rookie year. When you're rehabbing, you don't get to be, prepping week to week. You're not really getting used to that. So he's really still in his second camp, but his first year. So seeing a play like that, seeing him be able to confidently execute his assignment, even though his assignment sort of pointed him the right direction by a factor of luck, it's still good to see him make that play. Will he ascend the depth chart over Metellus and Bynum, etc.? I'm not sure, but I don't think he has to like get in the game and become a useful piece of the Minnesota Vikings, because of the way that Flores approaches things. Remember, it's assignments, it's roles, it's jobs, it's skill sets. It's not snap counts. So keep that kind of thing in mind as we go to camp. I am so excited to get into training camp next year tomorrow, I mean, and tell you some of the stuff that I have noticed. I'll be on that live thing again on the Locked On Vikings YouTube channel. So make sure you get get ready for that. It'll be right as camp breaks, which is what, like 5-ish central time. So check that out. Come by, ask me questions. If you have questions you want me to answer on Twitter Tuesday, you can do that as well. You can send an email to lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com. You can fill out the Google form, which will be included in the show notes of every episode. You can send it to me on Twitter at LukeBraunNFL or at LockedOnVikings. Or you can leave a YouTube comment and I'll probably see it. Now, here's the thing. I'm on the road, so I might not go to all of those other places. Twitter's probably the best way to do it. Sometimes I'll just read it off the Twitter thread. So keep an eye out for that. And at some point on Monday, I'll have a call out for questions, and just ask me the question then, and I will answer it best I can. I will see you all tomorrow for that. And as always, Skull.